Hi, I'm RC Jim. Welcome to our channel. Well, have you got a buddy that you would like to train how to fly? Well, you might need a buddy box. That's what this video is all about. Now, back in the old days, you know, when Moses was a little kid and whatever, no. Back, say about 25 years ago when I was learning how to fly with my teenage boys, we had that Great Plains Trainer 40, that green plane that you see right there. That's the actual plane. That was our first plane for learning how to fly radio control. We didn't have any trainers. We didn't have anybody to show us. We didn't have YouTube channels to go to. We had nothing. And we just went out and had ourselves a little high-tech radio, 4-channel, and flew that plane. And, well, we tried to fly the plane. We mostly crashed it. But needless to say, it was a bit of an issue. I think it was the very first flight that we were in an open field, and there's a stand of trees down at the end and a creek meandering through underneath the trees. And I got the plane set up on the field, and you know, we hit that old throttle and the thing just went zooming along, and I don't think it ever got a foot off the ground, maybe 2 feet off the ground. I don't know what was going wrong, but anyway, it smashed into those trees at full throttle, busted into a million pieces. The engine went into the creek, never did find it, but hey, the plane got repaired and we kept on going. Well, I think there's probably a better approach. Just because I did it that way doesn't mean that you and your friends need to do it in that particular manner. So what I want to help you with today is to show you how to set up a buddy box. Of course, with a buddy box, you got one transmitter for the instructor, you got one transmitter for the student. When the student has control, of course, the instructor has his finger there, but the minute the student gets in a bit of trouble, the instructor lets his finger off of the button, has complete control, and, you know, it just takes the pressure off. You know, you don't have to worry about crashing because, you know, we're flying a trainer, and certainly the guy that's doing the instructing can fly a trainer, but it really opens things up to really make the process go well. So what I want to do today is to show you how that you could be an instructor, how you can help one of your friends get into the hobby. And hey, you've got a transmitter. He'll need to get a transmitter to fly his plane with. And so hey, you're all set and you can get them up and going. So here's what it's all about. Well, you may have heard of systems back in the old days where as you had two transmitters, you would run a cable from one to the other, and you could use one as a buddy box. Yeah, that's all well and good until you get all tangled up in the cable or the cable pulls out or whatever the case might be. Well, nowadays, especially with a Spektrum transmitter, and there'll be others that can do the same thing, nowadays you can have a wireless link. And you wonder how that works? Well, you've got a radio, and your radio is controlling an airplane out here. And of course, my great skills in drawing come to the forefront here. So you got the airplane there. The airplane has a little receiver inside it, and the transmitter is a transmitter. And so you've got the radio waves that go zinging through the air, and the transmitter controls the plane through that receiver. Well, if you have a Spektrum radio or another radio that's enabled for wireless use, it's actually also got a little receiver inside it. So it's not just the transmitter, it's also a receiver. And so you can have another radio over here that sends off a signal that can go over here and get picked up by this receiver and end up flying the airplane. So this radio has got programming involved to where if the little button is pressed in, it says, let's take the signal that's coming from this radio over there, and we'll use that to send it off to the airplane and control it. So the signal is still coming from the instructor's radio to the airplane. This radio has been bound to the airplane, and this one hasn't. So the signal is coming from here, but it just chooses to use the instructions that are given to it by the student radio as long as the button is pressed in. And I might mention you don't have to use that button. You can program a switch or whatever you want on the radio to control that. So that sort of system is what makes this buddy box work. So let's get into the specifics as to how you go about doing it. Well, the first thing to do in getting started is to have the instructor radio bound to the airplane. So that's just standard sort of stuff. You, of course, turn on your radio, you turn on the receiver, press the button or put the bind plug in, put it in the bind mode, and you go to your menu to go down here and bind it, and off you go, you know. So you have the instructor radio bound to the airplane. Then you need to go through and make sure that you got everything set up. So you go through your system setup menu, and of course you've already selected the model, the particular one that it is and what type it is, the aircraft type and so forth. And you get all the settings in there. Having gone through the system setup menu, you then go into your function list. You do anything that might be needed in the servo setup to get controls moving in the right direction. You set up your rates in Expo and all that type of thing. Certainly make sure you got your throttle cut set properly. And so you've got all of those things set up to where this radio is able to fly that plane, and it does it in such a way that you're comfortable with it. Okay, so having done that, then what we want to do, as you think about our situation over here, is we've got the instructor radio bound to the plane. Now we need to bind the student radio to the instructor. So it's just as if this radio is an airplane, you know, as far as going through a binding process, but it's actually got a special menu to enable you to do that. Okay, so in our instructor radio, we press in the button. We go down to the system setup menu. Of course, it's going to disable the RF. We don't have the airplane hooked up to it this stage. And you go down to trainer. Okay. Okay, then pick wireless trainer. And it's got the information here for what's happening. So you got wireless training, standard instructor, and in this menu here, it's showing you the various things that can be allowed in from the student radio to the instructor radio. So you got all your basics that it controls: throttle, aileron, elevator, rudder, gear, and flaps. And any one of those you could disable if you wanted to, like if you didn't want him to be able to control the landing gear and you had them, you could tick that one and that's turned it off. And of course you can see it's student and instructor, so as when it's on instructor, that's to say it's just the instructor that would have that. Gives a switch that can control it, and of course this is switch I here up on the top. So the bind button, and so that means that's what's going to make it work or not work. Now, one thing I do want to discuss is what control to use for transferring control to the student. Typically it's the I button, the bind button up here, but you can use a switch. I typically have landing gear over there, and this is my throttle safety switch and all, but you could decide on a particular switch, you know. For me, it might be this one or that one that I don't use for other things. They're both 3-position switches, so, you know, whatever that might mean. But there is that option. Now, if we go into our menu here for the trainer, let's get down to System Setup, and we go into our trainer menu. Trainer and wireless trainer. Okay, you see that you can set the switch I, so we could set that to something else if we wanted a switch. And the question is, why might you want to do that? Well, if you've got a student that is doing pretty well, you might still want to have the buddy box on there just in case, and to sit there for 5 minutes holding in the bind button can get a little bit tiring on the finger. So if you had a switch, you could just leave it there. But then, you know, the question is, are you going to be able to respond in time? Well, that's where this master override comes in. Right now we got an inhibit. Now if we make that active, then what happens is with a master override, even though you've got the switch in the student position, the minute you touch a control, any of these sticks, you get any sort of input from any stick, it's going to immediately transfer the control back to the instructor. And to give it to the student again, you'll have to cycle that switch one more time. So that could be a good thing. And, you know, in terms of thinking about whether or not to do that, you know, my biggest concern would be that I inadvertently bump a switch without thinking that I've got control and it goes crazy. But I mean, if it goes crazy, I'm going to take control anyway, you know, and so I'm going to have it back. So, you know, that's not all that bad to think about using a switch instead of using a button. Whatever it is, you just want to get used to it. But keep in mind that you do have the ability both to set the switch and also to set master override to active if you want to use something other than the bind button. So that's all you need to do as far as that is concerned. But we then need to bind it to the other radio. So we've got the bind thing up there, so you scroll until that thing lights up. You get your student radio up here. Okay, you get it in the right model, so this has got a ranger in it. Okay, so we've got our instructor radio ready to bind. We then go to our student radio and we go to our system setup list. So we pick that and we go down to bind. Okay, and so that's all set. Yeah, okay. So put receiver in bind mode, then select bind. So this is now our receiver over here. So we put it in bind mode, and then we click that one. And generally they shouldn't be so close together. But anyway, it worked. Okay. So now we've got a situation where the student radio should be able to control the instructor's radio. And as you see here with this monitor, this is just going from the main screen, turning the scroll wheel one notch to the right. You got the monitor. Right now I've got control. You can see ailerons going up and down. You can see elevator going up and down. You can see rudder. You can see rudder going back and forth. But if I've got the button down, then you can see nothing is happening there. But with the student radio, up and down, back and forth, it's all taking place there. So that's how we want to have it.
Instructor has control.
Okay, now with that you might think, oh, that's dead easy. Oh, it's all set and everything's ready. But there are some cautions. And let me just show you an example. Okay, we've got a radio set up. We're bound to the airplane. We've got control, you know, with the instructor. He can do flaps. He can do all kinds of things. Okay. He decides to give it to the student. And now the student has control. But do you notice what happens when I press the button? Watch the control surfaces.
Student has control.
Elevator went up. Rudder went to the right. Ailerons went slightly to the right. What is going on here? Okay. Well, I've got all of the trims zeroed out on the student, and on the instructor, you know, this has been trimmed out for flying, and it's got trims in place, you know, minus 34, minus 10, you know, plus 54, Yeah, wow. So as you think about all of that, you've got to have the student radio set up identical to the instructor radio. Otherwise, you know, the moment you hit that button, everything goes crazy, and you're going to have some real problems. Okay? So you need to go through all of the settings. Now, the way that you do that is you go to the monitor. So again, just take the scroll wheel one notch to the right, and you got the monitor that shows you all of the settings for all of the channels. And so right off, it's showing you if everything is neutral. It's showing you what the settings are for the channels with the trims in place. So aileron, I got -3. Over here, I got 0. Okay, so aileron, I want to go -3. Okay. Elevator, I got +16. So I want to go on the elevator +16. Rudder, we've got rudder, we've got +10. So I go over here and do +10. And let's just get this to where you can see it a little bit better. Okay, so we're going through all of these different settings. So we just set the aileron, elevator, and rudder to where they're all. Oh, actually, rudder we haven't done yet. Rudder is +10. Don't we? Okay, and let's see what else we got. Rudder, aileron. Okay, aileron is right. Well, it says -2. There we go. Aileron -3. Elevator +16. Rudder +10. Gear, it's down. I got +100, so a good thing this doesn't have landing gear. And auxiliary, on this one it's flaps. On this one, yeah, we got a separate one for flaps. Auxiliary is at 7th channel. Okay, okay, so we've got those set up. Now, I might mention that when I first went to set up this plane, there was something that was awfully wrong, and I got the trims to where they were set right, and yet I was still getting a big change on one of the control surfaces. Well, what was happening was that in the subtrim menu, under servo setup, you've got subtrims, and in that menu it had some subtrim set. Now I've zeroed them all out now, but they had subtrim set, and of course subtrims, you use those to make sort of major adjustments to get the control to where it looks like it's roughly in the middle, and then you go flying with it and you use the individual trim tabs on the radio to fine-tune the trimming. So that had been done on this radio, whereas with mine I had just started with 0 subtrims. So that type of thing will throw it off as well. Now, along with those things, you need to make sure that your rates and expos are suitable. Now, those don't actually have to be the same. I recommend that they are. Mainly, the main reason for having them the same is that if the student ends up flying the radio with the instructor radio, he would want it to feel the same as what he's been practicing on with a student radio. oftentimes you will set it up to where the radio that's going to stay with the airplane is the instructor radio, and the surplus radio is going to be the student radio. And the reason for doing that would be that the instructor radio can be fully configured. All of the controls, all of its features, all of its functions can be fully configured for that airplane. With a student radio, it's just simply that information that this is allowing. So you saw those channels that it's allowing to come through, and of course anything that can affect the output for those channels would have the impact on those things. But nonetheless, there'll be quite a few things on this radio. Say, for example, stabilization settings. There wouldn't be any way to control that from this radio. So oftentimes this will be the radio that stays with the airplane, and that being the case, you want the rates in the expo to be identical between the student radio and the instructor radio. But certainly the most important thing is that when you change over control, going from one to the other, you need to look at that airplane and make sure that nothing is moving at all. Okay, that is the really key thing. Okay, now as you think about stuff that you want to make sure is right, let's just have a look at the plane here. Now, as you think about things that you want to make sure are right, one thing to check is if you've got a stabilizer, you want to make sure that it stays in the same mode when you switch over. So right now it's got that rapid flashing, which means that this is in the stabilizer mode. When I hit the button, we want to make sure it continues flashing the same way. And yes, as we look at that, it's still flashing in the rapid sort of thing, which is different than if it was turned off, where it has a slow flash, or if it's in the panic sort of mode, that it would be just on fully. So I would think you'd want stabilizer mode, because you want the student to be able to learn how to fly the airplane. But that stabilizer mode is really good with regard to handling wind gusts and things such as that. So just make sure that that doesn't change when you swap over from control from the instructor radio to the student radio. With regard to setting up the flaps, I did have some issues. Of course, most of the time a student is going to be flying with flaps. But, given that the control is there, I would like them to work the same. The NX6 and I believe a DX8 and maybe a DX6 would do it, where they've got the flap menu in here. And if the radio had that, no problem at all. You can set the position of the flaps. You can set how much mixing you want to the elevator. And all of that is very good. But on the DX6E, we don't have a separate flap menu, so we have to use the digital switch setup. So we go in here, we select a switch, switch D, and so I can set that up with the same settings that I have on my NX. So I had to put opposite signs to get the same result, but anyway, minus 91, 91, 15, minus 15, 100, minus 100. So I got all of that. With that, they work fine. If I go to a mid-flap position on my instructor radio, I go to a mid-flap position on the student radio, and let's just get where you can see the flaps. Okay, if I go to a mid-flap position on the instructor radio and a mid-flap position on the student radio, and I give the control over to the student, it doesn't move. Okay, so that's all fine. But notice what's happening to the elevator. The elevator, I've got mixing in there to give some down elevator when we put the flaps on, and that's not staying the same. And so the mixing that I set up to work with the DX, it's not getting the middle position right. Now I'm now switched over to the full flap setting.
Student has control.
And with the full flap setting, no movement on the elevator.
Instructor
So that's
has
all
control.
fine. If I bring it back up to 0 flaps, and I change controls, again, no change to the elevator, so I can get it right between 0 flaps and full flaps, but the mixing isn't quite right for the middle one. So not a great big deal, but it'd be nice if I had some way to work that out. And so if you got any ideas, let me know. But we have that situation there. And of course, where with the NX, we had the ability to do the mixing right here in the flap system. For the DX, we have to go back to mixing, and we have to set up a mix for that. So we go down here. I've got the auxiliary 1 to elevator. Auxiliary 1 I've assigned to switch D, and we've got the elevator in there with the offsets. So a little bit of an issue with regard to that, but that's kind of a minor thing, and like I say, most of the time you're not going to be flying with flaps with a student. Now, before we call it quits, I want to discuss one item that I was asked about when I first published this video, and no, I'm adding this in for your benefit. Get where you can see that maybe a little bit better. The question was, what about the pilot link option? So if we go into our system setup, and we go over here and we go down to trainer, we go wireless trainer, and you see we got standard instructor. Well, we also have a choice of pilot link instructor. And there's also FPV, but we're not doing that. But anyway, pilot link instructor, the general idea of it is that if the student, well, the control that the student has is only the input from the sticks. So if he goes to, say, change, rates, or go to a different flight mode, mode 1, mode 2, mode 3, whatever, all of those other things, they shouldn't be working if the pilot link instructor is on. It should just simply be the stick input coming into this radio, and then this radio does everything in terms of modes and expos and various things like that. But the problem is that it's not entirely true. Okay, it's partially true, but yeah, let's just have a look and see what happens as you compare the pilot link instructor to the standard instructor. So we've got both of our radios set up and going here. We've got the both in flight mode 1. We've got it set in the standard mode right now. And in the standard mode, that's where everything needs to be identical on both. But here we've got some very different trims than what we have over here on the instructor. With the instructor, on elevator, plus 52, student 0, aileron minus 10, student plus 56, rudder plus 34 on the instructor, plus 62 on the student. And so, very naturally, as we press the button to switch over control, you see how the controls have moved.
Instructor has control.
Letting it off.
Student
Okay.
has control. Instructor has control. Student has control.
Now, what I'm going to do next, we're having a look at how far that rudder has moved. And if you look at the top of the rudder, let's see, let's get where you can see the top of the rudder. Okay. We're looking at how far these controls have moved. And if you look at the top of the rudder, that has come out, I don't know, what would you say, 4 millimeters, something like that. say about 4 millimeters for that front part of the top of the rudder, how far it's sticking out from the vertical fin.
Student has control. Instructor has control.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change over to the pilot link mode. And as I change over to the pilot link mode, we're going to see what happens as far as the trims that have been set on the student radio. Okay, so now we are in the pilot link trainer mode, and with this we still got our weird settings over here. Right now I've still got the student into mode 1, but mode 2 is actually the one that is identical to mode 1 on the instructor as far as rates go. So anyway, I press the button.
Student has control. Instructor has control. Student
and
has control.
Very small difference.
Student has control.
Okay, just 1 millimeter.
Student has control. Instructor
Okay.
has control.
I put it back onto mode 1.
Student has control. Instructor has control.
Okay,
Student
just
has
a very
control.
small difference
Instructor has
again.
control. Student has control. Instructor has control.
Okay. So the fact is that when you're in the pilot link mode, then these rates have very little to do. And actually, let's have a look at rates. Okay. Let's get these all the way over so our rudder is all the way to the right. And let's just have a look at our monitor to see that we're getting the same sort of input. Okay, rudder. Well, the trims are different, so we end up with a different result. Okay, so anyway, all the way to the right, we then transfer over the student.
Student has control.
And it's a lot less, and that's because it's mode 1.
Instructor has control.
Mode 2 should be the same.
Student has control.
But
Instructor has control. Student has control. Instructor has control.
You know,
Student
it's got
has
less.
control. Instructor
And we are
has
in pilot link where it shouldn't be affecting it when the student changes, some other switch. So my concern with pilot link is that just there's some mysterious things going on. It may be that it minimizes the impact of any changes that might have been made in the student radio, but it doesn't eliminate them. And when you depend on it to eliminate them, then there's the danger that you might have something drastically different that could really throw things off, and the student might be wondering why he's having a hard time getting control of this thing. And it's because some trim or something is different along the way. So my thought would be to stick to the standard mode, just make sure everything is identical and right. The student knows that, if he wants to practice doing trims and different things like that, it's all going to work like normal, okay? That's similar to, like, say, flying with the safe mode, sort of a thing. Sure, it makes it a lot easier to fly, but that's not how he's going to end up flying. He's going to learn some bad habits, and he's going to be using too much control movements. So, far better just use a stabilizing mode. So that's my thought with regard to pilot link. Well, I trust this has been helpful to you. I might mention before we close that one thing to keep in mind is that you're going to have some additional checks to do when you arrive at the field. So, you'd normally go there, you would check over your plane, make sure everything is good with that. You'd power up the plane and turn on your transmitter. You do a range check, make sure all the controls are going in the right direction. But now that you've got a student, you've got some additional things to do. So you need to turn on the student radio, make sure that when you press in the button, it transfers control. Look very carefully at the control surfaces on the airplane to make sure that nothing moves when you press in that trainer button. And then also with the trainer button in, check all of the control movements, make sure all the controls are going in the right direction for the student. Yeah, just you've got those additional things to look after. And you do that, and I'm sure you'll be fine. Well, enjoy your flying and help somebody else to enjoy it as well. So work out that buddy box system and get somebody else out to the field and show them how much fun it is. I'm RC Jim signing off. You have a great day.